We are joined by Dr. Kamran Bukhari, who is a senior resident fellow, Middle East Policy Council. Thank you so much, Dr. Kamran, for joining us. First, what is your initial take on the Islamabad talks?
I would say so far so good. I mean, we weren't expecting any miracles. Nobody expected that, within 20 hours or so, we would have a deal. But the fact that we've come this far, as is evident from the interview that the vice president gave to Fox News last night, I mean, I think we're on track in terms of the progress. The White House has acknowledged as much, and the behavior of the Iranians is also suggesting that this is the case. Now, where do we go from here is the big question.
Yeah. What are the chances of a second or more rounds of talks? Or if we just randomly build three scenarios, what's more probable in your opinion? Iran returning to the table, an accidental war because something happens in the Strait of Hormuz because they are eye to eye, or a stalemate?
First of all, I don't think we should equate, the Iranian capabilities with the U.S. capabilities. I think that's a very popular misnomer around the world. The Iranians know this as much. They are absolutely engaged in information operations because that's what you do when you know you need to compromise. So I think that the issue here is best case scenario is we have some sort of an understanding. When we don't know, I hesitate to call it an agreement. I would say it's more of an understanding because the divide is so wide that getting to an agreement per se that will last is going to take time. Remember that the Obama administration, even with its watered down, JCPOA, did not reach the final stages until 2 years later. So I think we need to bear that in mind. But for now, I think there's an understanding that can be expected. That's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is, of course, there's a miscalculation, and that leads to further conflict. The Iranians have been miscalculating since, as was evident in the June 2025 war, and of course the collapse of the three meetings between Witkoff and Mr. Abbas Araghchi in Muscat and in Geneva. This is right before the war began, the current war on February 28th. So I think that, we just have to wait and see. There are too many moving parts right now for us to sort of say, hey, this is where things are likely headed. But the imperatives of Iran and the imperatives of the United States are as such that we will likely reach some form of an understanding.
Right. President Trump says Iran called this morning, and Bloomberg reports that new talks are being discussed before April 22nd. Does this claim, combined with the blockade's economic pressure, genuinely change the probability of a deal? Or is this Trump managing the political optics of $4.12 gas prices ahead of midterms?
Of course, the president has to manage, public expectations because the price of gas has indeed gone up. There are serious political and economic limitations, that the president is challenged by. There's no, denying that. But I think that there's a bigger thing here, which is that the issue for the American side is one of political and economic repercussions. The issue for the Iranian regime is more existential. This much has been acknowledged by regime officials. And for them, the goal is, look, we need regime preservation. And regime preservation can only come in two ways, and both are necessary. You can't just have one. First is a permanent end to hostilities. What the Iranians don't want is to go back to last June and then, have the fear that this war can erupt at any point in time. They've been hit hard. Their internal political economic situation is very fragile. They can't have open-ended conflict. So what they don't want is for the United States to say, okay, since there's no deal, we'll continue with some military operations and unilaterally withdraw. They don't want that. So they need a permanent end to hostilities. Number two is it's not just a permanent end to hostilities, and the only way you can get to a permanent end to hostilities is through a compromise on the issues that everyone knows about, enrichment, ballistic missile capability, proxies, and then, of course, the Strait of Hormuz. So I think that because of that, because of what the Iranians must have, I think we are looking at these talks moving forward, another round, perhaps two, we don't know, because we don't have the details on that. But the fact that the Iranians came to Islamabad to begin with, after the president threatened strikes on infrastructure, suggests that they know that there's less to gain from in terms of blocking the Strait of Hormuz and far more to lose.
Both sides declare victory, but realistically speaking, or making an analysis, which side is in the more need of an off ramp?
The Iranians, clearly. I mean, for them, it's existential. That's the point I've been making. I mean, the United States needs an off ramp, but it's of a different nature. Okay. It's not existential for the United States. So I'll explain in the following way. Let's say there's no deal. The United States has the option to continue with a short period of further airstrikes and then unilaterally withdraw, and we go back to sort of the model of 1991 Gulf War with the Iraqi regime of Saddam Hussein. And then you impose no-fly zones, you impose more restrictions, blockades, and so on and so forth, and you just let it simmer. The Iranians, on the other hand, can't afford that. For them, as I said, it is existential.
All right. Let me ask you about markets. Oil peaked above $103 after the blockade announcement, then pulled back towards 99 when Trump made his Iran called a statement. The S&P 500 closed in the green. The IEA, World Bank, and IMF all warned today that even after reopening, prices stay elevated for a prolonged period. At what oil price, 110, 20, 30, does economic pain becomes politically unsustainable for President Trump domestically?
I think it's pretty, the pain is already increasing. There may be some room to maneuver, but I don't see that, the president can allow for prices to really jack up. I wouldn't even go into the 130 range. That's just too much. So yes, that is a constraint. But at the end of the day, I think that the Trump administration is trying to reach a settlement. This is why, if you look at what came out of the press conference in Islamabad, came out what the vice president said to Fox News. It does seem like the Americans are willing. There are certain red lines, and those are few. But the details, you can engineer the deal. And so that's why that flexibility is there, because the Americans know that the political and economic clock is ticking.
Right. Let's talk of France and Britain for a moment, as they are organizing a multinational Hormuz mission, which is distinct from the US blockade and from Iran. Is there a possibility of any of these parties responding to that?
Well, I mean, we have to look at capability. What are France and Britain capable of? I mean, if they were capable, then we would not be having the debate over NATO. We would not be having the debate over what will happen, in the future with Russia and Ukraine. So I think that the Brits and the Americans, the French and other European players, like the Spanish, obviously have to balance their domestic political compulsions with their foreign policy needs. And that's what they're trying to do. I just don't see them doing anything separately. I mean, they can do diplomacy. They can go talk to the Gulf states, which they're already doing. They can perhaps talk to the Iranians, which again they're already doing, and they're in conversation with the Americans. If they're going to do something, in a physical manner, in a logistical manner or kinetic manner, I think that'll have to be coordinated with the Americans on their own. I don't think they have the capability to do anything.
Yeah, Macron calls it strictly defensive and separate from the warring parties. But still, what could have triggered to come into play at this stage from the European side, I mean?
Because look, at the end of the day, everybody knows that the United States is rolling out a new geostrategy. The new geostrategy is based on the idea that there's going to be burden sharing and burden shifting by allies and partner nations around the world in different regions. And everybody knows that the United States wants to set up a new architecture based on this principle, and then it's going to retrench to the Western Hemisphere. So everybody's alarmed by that. I mean, they're not the only ones. The Europeans aren't the only ones. Look at the Japanese and then their posturing. They know that there's going to be some sort of an understanding between the United States, an accommodation between the United States and China, and they have to adjust to that new world. So the problem is that many people around the world are still sort of going by the old script of post World War II, the so-called liberal rules-based international order.
True.
And when reality has moved on, and the United States is adjusting, and I think everybody else is adjusting as a result. And I think the European behavior has to be understood in that context.
Right. The last question. The stalemate scenario has a hard clock. The ceasefire expires on April 22nd, 8 days from now. When the ceasefire expires without a deal, what changes on the ground?
So there are a couple of ways this can go about. One is that during this time period, enough progress has been made that the United States agrees to an extension of the ceasefire, because this is something that the United States declared that, okay, we're gonna have a ceasefire and we're gonna halt operations for negotiations. So if there's progress, further progress than what happened in Islamabad, substantive, then we can see an extension if it's needed, because there could be things that are not, it's not possible to sort out physically in this 1 week. So that's one scenario. The other, and I think that that is, that could very likely be the case. Another scenario, which is more the best case, which is that everything wraps up. I find it a bit hard to believe that, given the gulf between the two sides, that everything will be wrapped up. And then there's the worst case scenario in which, things collapse and then we see another round of kinetic operations.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kamran Bukhari, for your time. It was a pleasure having you on our show today.